Here in session 90, we're going to solve quadratic equations by factoring. But before we do that, the underlying principle behind solving these types of equations by factoring is the zero product property. And basically what that property says is that if A times B equals 0, then either A must be 0 or B must be 0. That's pretty obvious because if you remember, any number times 0 is going to be equal to 0, but there is no way for you to take any numbers other than 0 and multiply them together to get 0. The only way you can ever get 0 for a product is if one of the factors that's being multiplied together is 0. Now how that helps us we'll see here shortly. Let's take a look at our first quadratic equation here. X squared plus 8x minus 9 equals 0. Let's go ahead and quickly factor this. Our x squared is going to have an x as its first term in the first polynomial there, and x as the first term in the second. We now need to take a look at our constant here, negative 9. We need to think of factors of negative 9. Well, we have 1 times negative 9. We have minus 1 times positive 9. We have positive 3 times negative 3, or negative 3 times positive 3. So basically the factors we're looking at are 1, 3, and 9. But we have to remember our middle term here. What we're after is an 8x. Well, if I chose 3 and 3, the most that I would ever get for a middle term would be a 3x plus a 3x, which would be a 6x. We're after an 8x. So that should tell us right away that one of our factors has to be a 9. So what we need to do is choose 9 and 1. Because that 1 times the 9 will give us that 9 that we're after. However, it's not a positive 9 we're after, it's a negative 9. So we either need to make the 1 negative or we need to make the 9 negative. Well, before we just choose, and you could choose it by trial and error, if you take a look at the middle term here, you should be able to determine which of these two to make negative. And that is because our middle term here is a positive xx, or excuse me, a positive 8x. If we were to make this a positive 9 and this a negative 1, that would give us a positive 8x. If we were to make this a minus 9 and this a positive 1, that would give us a minus 8x. So what that tells us is that we need to make the 9 our positive and the minus 1 our negative. And if we were to then carry out, take our factoring and carry it back out, x times x is x squared. X times plus 9 is plus 9x. So that takes care of our first term. We are now going to distribute our second term. Minus 1 times x is minus 1x, or just minus x. And minus 1 times 9 is minus 9. Our x squared here matches our x squared over here. The 9x minus x here equals 8x. That matches our 8x term over there, and our minus 9 matches our 9 here. So we have seen that x minus 1 times x plus 9 is the factorization of x squared plus 8x minus 9. However, the question is, which values of x will make this equation equal to 0? Well, we go back to our 0 property. Whenever you multiply any numbers together, any factors together, that either means that one of the factors is equal to 0 or the other one's equal to 0. So let's take a look. What's the first quantity that we're multiplying together? Well, the first quantity is our x minus the 1. The second quantity is x minus the 9. So those are our two quantities there, x plus 1 and x minus 1 and x plus 9. In order for this to equal 0, this first term has to equal 0, or this second term polynomial has to equal 0. Well, in which case would this first term equal 0? Which value for x will make this 0? Well, when x is 1, that first term will be 0. Why? Because 1 minus 1 is 0. Then if you were to stick that same 1 in the second one, 1 plus 9 is 10. 0 times 10 is 0. So we know that one of the solutions to this problem is when x equals 1. That takes care of that one. Well, let's take a look at our second factor that's being multiplied together, x plus 9. How can we get a 0 as a value for x plus 9? Which value of x do we have to select? Well, that would be a negative 9. And that's because negative 9 plus 9 is 0. And that 0 times this negative 9 minus 1 would be minus 10. Minus 10 times 0 is also 0, because once again, anything times 0 is 0. So that takes care of the second one. So what was our strategy here for this particular quadratic equation? We made sure it was in standard form, which it is. Then the second thing we did is we factored it. We factored it into x minus 1 times x plus 9. The next step we did is we then said set each of the factors equal to 0. X minus 1 equals 0. That means x had to equal 1. Or x plus 9 equals 0, which meant that the x had to equal a negative 9. Those are our two values. And lastly, we should probably go ahead and double check. Let's go ahead and place our values in there. X equals 1. 1 squared is 1. 8 times 1 is 8. 1 plus 8 is 9. And 9 minus 9 is 0. So we know x equaling 1 is a solution. Let's place in the minus 9 and see what we get. Minus 9 squared is 81. Minus 9 times a positive 8 is a minus 72. 81 minus 72 is 9, and then 9 minus 9 is 0. So minus 9 is also a value that works. So this particular quadratic equation has two solutions to it. X is 1 or x is minus 9. Let's take a look over here at one more. We have x squared minus 121 equals 0. This is already in standard form. What we need to do now is to go ahead and factor this. And what we should be able to notice here is this is the difference of two squares. So that's going to factor into x plus 11, because 121 is the square of 11, and x minus 11. That's the factorization of x squared minus 121. Then what we do is we set each of these two factors separately equal to 0. Well, what number plus 11 is 0? Well, that's a minus 11. Let's say now for this second factor, we want to set it equal to 0. Well, what value of x will do that? A positive 11. So we found out that the solution to this problem has two answers, x equals minus 11 or x equals positive 11. We'd need to double check. Minus 11 squared is 121. 121 minus 121 is 0. That works. And then positive 11 squared is also 121. And 121 minus 121 is 0. Let's go ahead and do one more. Then we'll be done for this particular lesson as far as examples. 2x squared minus 5x minus 12 equals 0. First, we need to ask ourselves, is this quadratic equation already in standard form? Yes, it is. Everything is on the left-hand side of the equation, the 0 is on the other side, and they are written in descending order, the highest power written first. Next, we need to go ahead and factor this. Well, taking a look at our x squared, there's only one way to factor 2x squared. That is, 2x has to be in one of them, and then 1x, or just simply x, needs to be in the other. So that 2x, when multiplied by this x, is going to give us our 2x squared. Next, we need to take a look at our constant here. It's negative 12. Well, what kind of factors does that give us? Well, we have 1 and 12. We have 2 and 6. And then 3 and 4. And since we have a negative 12, we're going to have some type of combination of a negative times a positive. Now, before we just start trying some different factors here, we need to take a look at our middle term. We need to get a minus 5x for a middle term. Well, if we went ahead here and put a 12 here, 12 times 2 would be 21, or excuse me, 24. And if we put the 1 here, that would be 1. 24 plus 1 would be 25, or 24 minus 1 would be 23. So obviously the 12 and the 1 aren't going to work. And if we were to switch that around, if we were to put the 12 here and the 1 over here, 12x plus a 1x, or plus a 2x would be 14, or minus would be a 10. So that's not going to work. Let's try 3 and 4. If we were to put a 3 here and a 4 over here, and what we're after is a minus 5x. Well, this 4 times this 2 will be an 8x and a 3x. Well, if you look, 8 and 3x, if we added those two together, that would be 11. But if we subtract 3x from 8x, that's going to give us 5x. But what we're after is a minus 5x. So what we're going to go ahead and do is make this 4 a minus and this 3 a positive. And what we can now do to verify that this factorization is accurate is just go ahead and multiply it out. 2 times x is 2x squared. 2x times a minus 4 is a minus 8x. The positive 3 times x is a plus 3x. And then lastly, our positive 3 times our negative 4 is a minus 12. And when you combine that together, you can see our 2x squared is what we started with there. Our minus 8x and our plus 3x combined together to make minus 5x, which is what we had to start with, and then minus 12 matching this minus 12. 2x plus 3 times x minus 4 is the correct factorization of 2x squared minus 5x minus 12. But we're not quite done yet. We need to set each of these factors equal to 0. So we're going to take our first factor, which is 2x plus 3. We need to make that equal to 0. Well, to get the x by itself, we have to subtract 3 from both sides. That's going to leave us with 2x on the left and minus 3 on the right. X is being multiplied by 2, so we have to divide both sides by 2. That's going to leave us x on the left and minus 3 halves on the right. Now, let's set our second x minus 4, our second factor, equal to 0. X is not by itself. We have to add 4 to both sides. That'll leave us with x on the left and 4 on the right. So we can see there are two values for x that solve this equation. X equals 4 and x equals minus 3 halves. So let's double check our work quickly here. And in order to do that, I'm going to erase some of this stuff to make some room. So let's go ahead and take our first one for x equal 4. 4 squared is 16. 16 times 2 is 32. That's our first term. Stick a 4 in here as well. 4 times minus 5 is minus 20. And then minus a 12. 32 minus 20 is 12, and 12 minus 12 is 0. So we just validated that x equals 4 is a correct solution. Now I erase that. Now let's try to validate or verify the other one. X equals minus 3 halves. Well, minus 3 halves squared is a positive 9 fourths. So we're going to have 2 times 9 fourths, because remember, negative times a negative is a positive. Then we're going to subtract from that 5 times 3 halves, or excuse me, 5 times minus 3 halves. And then we're going to take that and subtract 12 from it. 2 times 9 fourths is 9 over 2. 2 times 9 is 18. 4 times 1 is 4. 18 over 4 reduces to 9 over 2. So we have 9 over 2 in our first term there. Minus 5 over 1 times minus 3 over 2 makes a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. That's going to give us 15 over 2. That takes care of our second term. And then we're going to subtract 12 from that. We're going to do the rest here in our head. 9 halves plus 15 halves is 24 halves. 24 over 2 is the same thing as 12. So then that 12 minus this 12 does in fact give us 0, which is another solution to our original equation here. So x equaling minus 3 halves and x equaling 4 are the two solutions to this quadratic equation. Lastly, as a review, the zero product property states that if you have two numbers being multiplied together, a times b, and they equal 0, then that means that either a has to be 0 or b has to equal 0, or they can both equal 0. And also, you can solve some quadratic equations by first writing it in the standard form and then factoring it, which is what we did during this lesson. Then you set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Okay, that finishes up session 90 here on solving quadratic equations by factoring.